evening. Thank you all for coming on this beautiful night. I'm delighted to welcome you to this special occasion. Ellen already told you who I am. My name is Dr. Susan Apel, and I'm Dean of Concordia's Division of Health and Human Services. And tonight's program is presented by Concordia College's nursing program. I'm happy to point out some of the nursing students, our very special guests and beloved to us in the college and on the nursing faculty. So the program tonight is sponsored by the nursing program in conjunction with Westchester End of Life Coalition. As head of Concordia's nursing program, I'm so proud of the program that we offer. Students who come here are so blessed and so lucky to be in this amazing environment. A lot of programs say they have small classes with intimate relationships with their students. We really do. Our classes are small. The students know us. We know them. And that's an entirely good thing. Our nursing faculty are nationally, and I'm really excited to tell you this, internationally known. Our students and faculty travel to India. I have faculty members who do presentations in Hong Kong, Dublin, and Chennai, India. So for a little tiny jewel in Bronxville, New York, we have a very, very wide reach. One of the most important things about the nursing program here at Concordia is that we have an intentional commitment to care of the whole person. One would think that every nurse does that. I would hope that every nurse does do that, and we make sure our nursing students here and the 133 registered nurses that we have already graduated into the community have an appreciation for every aspect of a human being's health: spiritual, cultural, physical, emotional, because we are all one person, and all of these aspects of our life need to be considered. How we value the whole person is why I'm especially delighted to welcome Dr. Norma Bowe to Concordia this evening. Dr. Bowe's work is focused on high touch. She helps her students find value in the whole person, their culture, their spirituality, and their humanity. A tenured professor at Kean University, Dr. Bowe developed the course curriculum for Death in Perspective, which is the subject of the book, The Death Class, a true story about life, by award-winning journalist Erika Hayasaki. Dr. Bowe's course covers the biology, psychology, and history of dying, leading her students on unusual field trips to morgues, prisons, and cemeteries. Dr. Bowe brings the topic of death front and center. With careful personal attention, she encourages her students to face their anxieties, examine their grief, and most important, courageously create a life they want to live. Compassion is perhaps key to her success, and in no small measure, one of the reasons her course has, any faculty in the room, a 3-year waiting list. I've never heard of such a thing. I would love to have that kind of a wait list. Here at Concordia, we strive to instill that same careful personal attention in our nursing students. Our nursing program includes a unique course requirement, cultural and spiritual competence in the delivery of nursing care, and it is a course which emphasizes the importance of learning a patient's personal narrative in treating the whole patient. Dr. Bowe's course and the book affirm how powerful the personal narrative is to the healing process. While her compassion is extraordinary, her message is quite simple. By addressing our own mortality, we are able to free ourselves of anxiety and openly embrace this precious gift of life that we have. Dr. Bowe has undergraduate degrees in nursing and community health, a master's degree in health administration, and a PhD in community health policy. She has worked in emergency rooms, intensive care, and psychiatric wards before she began her teaching career at Kean University. The Death Class has been featured in national newspapers, television and radio, including the New York Times, Entertainment Weekly, the Chicago Tribune, NPR, and MSNBC. I am looking forward to learning more about her class and its remarkable 3-year waitlist. Tonight, we are also fortunate to have with us Christina Stout, loyal Concordia friend and neighbor, who is president of the Westchester End of Life Coalition, and Maura Del Bene, a nurse practitioner specializing in palliative care at WestMed Medical Group, who serves with Tina on the WELC board. After Dr. Bowe's presentation, they will join her in a discussion of the book about her class and their own perspectives on dealing with the topic of death and end-of-life concerns. I hope through Dr. Bowe's brave example and this evening's conversation, each of us will come away better informed, ready to address our own anxieties and find our own voice in this important conversation on death. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Norma Bowe to Concordia College, New York.
What an introduction. I'm so pleased that you invited me to come tonight to Concordia College. What a beautiful campus you have in a very beautiful area. I'm going to tell you a little bit now about my Death in Perspective class. And yes, indeed, we have a 3-year waiting list. Kean University is an urban campus. We sit in the shadow of New York City, but we are also neighbors with East Orange, Irvington, Newark, New Jersey, Elizabeth, areas that have a lot of urban kinds of challenges. So I just wanted to start off with one of my favorite quotes from my favorite poem. Mary Oliver said, "Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" And I think that's the crux of the death class, because ultimately the class certainly is about death. We learn about the biology of dying. We, go on the field trips. We do all sorts of grief work, interpersonal grief work. But ultimately the course is about our life and how we want to live our life. So how many of you have read the book? Anybody? When you read the book, you'll find out that like many of us that go into the helping professions, I started early. So this is a picture of me as a young girl. I think I was about 4 years old, and I probably see some injustice going on, and I'm going to solve the problem. But in fact, I had a very difficult childhood with a lot of chaos and a lot of violence in my life. I made friends with death at a very early age because I didn't know if I'd be alive from one day to another. And I went on and I lived, and I went on and went to nursing school. So some of you might recognize the cap and the pin. It was like a big deal to get that. And I went on to have a really incredibly wonderful nursing career in the ICU, in the neuro ICU, in the emergency rooms, and public health and hospice. And I made my way into mental health, and that's really where I did a lot of my clinical work. And I had other wonderful adventures. I had 2 children. This is my daughter, Melissa, and we're playing diaper heads. And this is my daughter, Becca. And then eventually, I was asked to teach a mental health course at a university called New Jersey City University. And, like many of us who have done clinical work for so long, I questioned whether I could teach. And I was sort of like, you've got to be kidding, you're asking me to teach a class? But they persisted, and so I did teach the mental health class, and I loved it. And from that class, one of the students transferred to Kean University and told one of the coordinators in the health education department about me and my teaching style. And before you knew it, I got the call, did I want to be an adjunct at Kean University and teach the Death in Perspective course, which I got very excited about until I read the course outline and the syllabus. I mean, for a death course, it was deadly, extremely deadly. I felt that this topic certainly could be taught in a didactic lecture style from the textbook. But what if I could take a course, turn it into an interpersonal experience for the students, weave the didactic information in with personal information, along with some field trips to bring everything to life. I wanted them to get a taste of some of the more clinical work that I had done and some of the places where I had been in order to fully understand death. Because when we learn about our own mortality, when we face our own mortality, then I believe we can truly live. And a lot of people don't believe that we're mortal and that there's such a thing as mortality. As a matter of fact, take a look at our media. We deal with death by turning everyone into a vampire. I was recently in Los Angeles talking to a TV producer. They were very excited about the book. They were talking to me about making a reality TV show, which I was not that interested in, I'll tell you. But imagine this. Imagine that at the end of the conversation, the producer asked me, looked me right in the eye, and very seriously asked me, could I speak to the dead? And I'm like, what did you just ask me? Could I speak to the dead? And I'm like, no, I don't speak to the dead. I try to get people who are alive to speak to each other before they're dead. But that seems to be the only way we deal with death. So anyway, this is Kean University. And here's my syllabus. I completely rewrote the whole course. So I want you to know that the very first day of class, we make a bereavement group. And you might not think that 20-year-olds, the very brave, courageous 20-year-olds that come to my class have a lot of experience with death. Maybe it's our urban campus, I don't know. But when I walk into the room and we sit in our circle for the very first class, and I ask the question, how many of you know someone who has died in an accident? Half the class raises their hand. How many of you know someone who has died of a chronic disease? 3/4 of the class raise their hand. And then I ask, how many of you know someone who's been murdered? And 3/4 of the class raise their hand. And I don't know that this is so unique to Kean University in Union, New Jersey. I think that we're very carefully taught not to talk about these kinds of things. Because if you keep on going, how many of you know someone who's attempted suicide? Half the class raises their hand. How many of you know someone who's completed suicide? Half the class raises their hand. So do 20-somethings have issues with death? Yes, they do. Are they grieving? Yes, they are. So this is in class. These are my students from last semester, and they're reading papers that they've written. These are actually poems that they've written about themselves to each other. And we do a lot of writing. It's a very, writing intensive course. I tell them the good news is that there's no term paper or research paper. The bad news is that you have a paper to write every single week. So when you're done, you will have 16 papers in your own voice about this topic. And so we do quite a bit of writing in the course and reading to each other. There's something about making a circle and having to look in each other's eyes and pay witness to someone else's grief and not look away. That grows us, that makes us into better people. You know, we're uncomfortable with death. We have death anxiety. We have bereavement anxiety. But having to look at a colleague in the class and watch their grief is something very powerful. And they bond. At the last day of class, I can't get them out the door. They're just, and Gabrielle will tell you, the last day of her class last semester, they started a group text thing. All of a sudden, there were 100 texts going between the group. They didn't want to let each other go. So here's one of the field trips. Here we are at the hospice. And the woman in the middle, of course, is our hospice patient. So excited to have so many visitors. She felt like a princess. She felt like a celebrity. The students love this kind of thing. This is another picture in the hospice. You see my student who's estranged from her father and hasn't spoken to him in 6 years. And she meets John at the end of his life, who's estranged from his daughter and hasn't talked to her in 2 years. And there's some healing that goes on in that moment. And Jennifer left this moment and went and called her father as soon as this was done. And John was very lucky because a student named Matt took a liking to him, and he still visits John. He goes 3 times a week and visits John. This is Billie Jane. She's playing bingo. So the students go back and do that with the residents at the hospice too. And if you look in the background, you're going to see some things that our Be the Change group did. We have a community service and activism group on campus that grew out of the deaf class. And one of the very first projects that we did was to redo the hospice, 3 of the rooms. And so students actually made those pieces of furniture that you see in the back of Billie Jane, another hospice. This patient, her wish was to have a computer so she could email folks. And the very next day, the student brought her a laptop that she wasn't using any longer. We go to Ronald McDonald House, and the students get to visit with families who have very sick children, some of whom die. That's actually one of the moms who has a sick child who has shaken baby syndrome. The little girl was adopted from Thailand, and she doesn't respond very much to anyone except when the students come. And so this was just one of those very beautiful moments. The students in Be the Change got together and collected monies to help this family, who's from Tennessee, build a wheelchair ramp on their house. We go to a funeral home. My students have to plan for their funeral for when they're 100. They have to make purchases of their own caskets or urns. They have to make a funeral plan for what they want. And here they are in the funeral home. And I want to tell you about Lisa, whose brother died very suddenly a couple of years ago. And Lisa was just grief-stricken about this. And she's a nurse. The thing that kept her up at night was thinking about her brother in the casket. So when we got to the funeral home, she said, "Dr. Bowe, I want to try on the casket." And I was like, "Are you sure?" And she said, I have to get into the casket. So I asked the funeral director, and he said, okay. Lisa climbed into the casket. She wanted her picture taken in the casket. She asked me to close the lid. When she was done, she knocked. When we opened the lid and she climbed out, she said, "I'm no longer afraid. It's peaceful. It's quiet. There's nothing to be afraid of in this casket." I do a lecture in a cemetery. The cemetery is like a history lesson. The particular cemetery we go to is really interesting because you can track the immigration to the area just by reading the tombstones and looking at the dates on the tombstones and seeing who came first and then who came next and which kinds of special gifts and things did they bring with them when they came to the area. And they have to look for true love is one of the 25 things that they have to find in the cemetery. It's a cemetery scavenger hunt of sorts. And you can learn a lot about people by looking at their tombstone. This man was from Puerto Rico. He was a plumber. His tools are hanging on a sculpture right over his tombstone. And we go to a prison. And you might ask me, why do you do that? We do a capital punishment debate in the class. But there's also a lot of death in the prison. You see people that are physiologically alive. They're breathing, they're moving around. But there's a lot of death there. There's death of freedom. There's death of being with your family. There's death of a lot of things. There's death of safety. And I started taking the students to the prison trip, and then an inmate challenged me one day and said, "Dr. Bowe, we've been doing this for you for a long time. We talk to your students, we take them around. We want you to come teach a class for us." And this is the very notorious, one of the very notorious prison classes. These men also took Death in Perspective. And if you read the book, you'll read about a man named Carl who beat to death the man that raped his sister with his bare hands and is spending 30 years in jail. He's the guy with the apron on. And that's the gang unit. I've also taught in the gang unit. And we go to a crematory and we look at the urns. These are, the crematory by us was one of the very first crematories in the United States. So there's so much history there, and some of these urns are very old. And you can see sometimes the students are kind of like, where are we right now? We go to see an autopsy. Whoever we see that morning on the table was alive the night before. So I ask the students to think about that. We all think we have 100 more years. And in fact, sometimes we make a lot of errors. Sometimes, especially in Newark, New Jersey, where this medical examiner's office is, sometimes we're a gang member and we think we're going to gangbang one last time, or we're going to be out there doing whatever we're going to be doing, and we end up shotting on the table. Or maybe we're a heroin addict and we think we know how much we can shoot up, but we don't because we're on the table. Or maybe we think we can drink and drive, but we're on the table. And so the students come away with this sense of, I need to treat my life in a more precious way. Things can happen to me. I had a student who came back from the autopsy trip, and he was coming right into another class with me, and he was quite late coming into the class from the autopsy trip. And I was like, Eric, what took you so long to get back to campus? And he said, Dr. Bowe, I drove 25 miles an hour on the highway. And I said, good for you. So here they are getting ready to go into the autopsy room. And I want to tell you about another beautiful thing that happens in the death class. This is Lindsay. Lindsay took this course last semester. Lindsay has a brain tumor. She had a lot of it debulked. It's in the frontal lobe. They couldn't take all of it without destroying her higher motor functions. So there's some of the tumor still in her brain. She very often has to have radiation or chemotherapy to keep the tumor down. And because of this, she has seizures quite a bit. So when you have a student like Lindsay, the death class takes on a whole new meaning. So this girl, every field trip, when we were at the funeral home, she had to lay herself down where she would be laying if she were in a wake. Or, at the autopsy, she's right in the front row. She wants to see everything. And she has such an incredible zest for life. She's amazing. But one day, we were doing a movement exercise in class, and she had had a seizure that morning and wasn't feeling so well. And she said, I'm going to sit this one out, Dr. Bowe. I'm not going to participate. And I said, okay, Lindsay. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I see this big football player who hadn't said much in class yet. I watch him walk across the room, and as gently as you can imagine, he picks her up and puts her on his back and carries her into the center of the movement exercise so that she could dance with the class. And of course, the lesson is what? The lesson is sometimes we need to be carried. Sometimes we can't do it on our own. And so it brings out this beauty in all of the students that are in the class. And that was the moment. I had to grab my phone and capture it because it was beautiful and compassionate and wise. The wisdom was incredible. And I turned my head because I started to cry. And the kid in the class who the very first day said, I'm not going on this field trip, I'm not writing this paper, I'm not doing this assignment, that was the kid who came over and gave me a hug. The joy just in that moment was just palpable. It was incredible. And when you have a student like Lindsay in the class, sometimes the lesson has to be playing in the leaves, if that's what you want to do that day. Now, Lindsay's graduating on Thursday, and that was her big goal. So now we're trying to come up with new goals. Sometimes, just sometimes, I have the wisest students, because I give special assignments when I think they're needed to help people have a little growth spurt. Right, Kat? Yeah. And sometimes the students give me a special assignment, and that's what this one is. Dear Dr. Bowe, welcome to your very own special assignment. It was amazing. So out of all of this came this incredible community service and activism group. The very first project was to redo those 3 rooms in the hospice. And after that, there was no stopping these students. So they were deaf and prospective students, but it grew. We have 590 people on our Be the Change Kean University Facebook page. So this was the hospice project. The girl on my right with the white. Ooh, that's so weird. It looks like angel wings. But she passed away. Doesn't that look like angel wings on her? Oh, geez, it's so weird. I never noticed that before. And this is what we did. Then we went to a teen homeless shelter in East Orange, New Jersey, where the crime rate is 4 times the national average. And there was a rapist in the neighborhood when we went. And every single wall, floor, and ceiling was gray. And Sears gave us 80 gallons of paint. The funeral home gave us the rollers and the paintbrushes. And we completely transformed this teen homeless shelter. And we now have 9 of those homeless teenagers as Kean University students at our college. And here some of them are with their cane bags on orientation day. We've done a memory garden on our campus because we needed a place where people could go and grieve. And sometimes I'll bring the class out there, especially if there's some very profound grief experience going on. The Buddhists say that if you walk in concentric circles, slowly with intention in a meditation kind of way, you can lay your burdens down in the middle. And that's what has now collected in the middle of our memory labyrinth. These girls lost their mothers. One of them lost her future mother-in-law as college students. And they made this garden, and everything in it blooms pink because the moms died of breast cancer. And this is where they go on Mother's Day. We went to the Gulf 5 times when the oil spill happened. So it's all death related in a lot of ways, but we're being the change we want to see in the world. When the Sandy Hook shootings happened in Connecticut, we got wind, I have a friend who lives in the area, and we got wind that the surviving kindergartners were gathering 3 days after the shooting because the surviving kindergarten teacher wanted to see the children. And they were meeting in the library in the children's room. And we went and we hung a star lantern lit up for every victim that died. So when the kids walked into the room, this is what they saw, all the stars lit up. We feed the homeless every week, every single week. We did Sandy relief. I just want to say that sometimes, unfortunately, at Newark Penn Station, there's 100 people that live in the train station. And one time, a person who we had just fed, and I had taken a picture with a student. I thought I had this picture in this collage, but I don't. I had taken his picture with 2 of the students, had just given him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and some water. And 2 weeks later, he was on the autopsy table. And that happens too when you have the mentally ill living outside in the winter that we've had now. We did Sandy relief. This is one of my proudest projects. We take abandoned gardens in Newark, New Jersey, where the crime rate's 5 times the national average, and we turn these abandoned lots into gardens for the community, and we give them to the community once they're done, and the community comes out and helps us. And what you don't see in this picture is a vegetable garden in a raised bed, because the soil's contaminated, and flowers, and we address the food desert in Newark. This is the garden. We did an urban farm for the elders on another street. A Before I Die wall on another street, because a kid had been murdered right on the corner. And the community comes now and they write their goals, what they want to do before they die on the wall. And for a murdered young man in Newark, we did the Phoenix Rising at his high school. We brought Santa to the block. We keep going back. And what that does is take back the street after there's been 8 homicides in one day. I get passionate about this, I'm sorry. And then imagine that one day my phone rings after all this. And this woman says that she's an LA Times journalist stationed in New York City, and she's heard about my Death in Perspective class, and could she come out and talk to me, interview me for an article? And I said, I don't know you. Send me something you've written. And what she sent was the article she wrote about Virginia Tech. And she didn't write it from the perspective of the shooter like everybody else. She recreated the French class where most of the folks died, including the French professor. And she recreated their lives. She recreated their dreams. She talked to the survivors. There were only 3 in that classroom that lived. And the article was beautiful. And I said, okay, now you can come. Come on now. And we spent a lot of time together. She said, I want to write this article. And I said, then I think you need to take the class. It'll be a different article if you take the class. And so she did. She took the summer class. She wrote the article. It was on the front page of the LA Times. After it came out, we had 3 book offers, and Grey's Anatomy's producers called. Imagine being in my office these days, right? The phone, you pick up the phone, you never know who you're gonna be, who's gonna be on the other end.
It's fun sometimes.
And he said, do you have 13 episodes? And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I have no idea. But Erika is an incredible writer, and so when this happened, I said, we got these 3 book offers. I could write a book about my class. And she said, I want to write the book because I'm a journalist. I'm gonna do this book in a different way. If you write about your class, of course you're gonna say really great things about your class. But if I do it, I'm gonna be looking at all of this through a very critical lens. And I was like, that's true. This is the way to go. This is what we should do. And so we spent an entire year together, almost every day. And then after that, she came back over a 4-year period of time. And, that's the article. It was syndicated all over the country. It was on the front page of the LA Times. It ended up on the front page of our local Star Ledger newspaper, too. There's Erika following me around down to the Gulf. This is in front of one of the nonprofits for Katrina relief with my students. But the book came out in January, and I don't, even to this day, even though I was so intimately involved with the manuscript and doing some fact checking and doing some editing, and some of the things I wanted her to edit out, she wouldn't. Like my meeting a student in my pajamas, it just had to happen that way. It just was that way. But The Death Class, A True Story About Life is a beautiful, beautiful book, and she's woven my story and some of the students' stories. And then Erik Erikson's life cycle model that I teach in class, and just everything into this book. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. And we've been really all over. I've been doing a lot of speaking all over the East Coast and the West Coast now too. We were on MSNBC. I have Norma Bowe water now over here with that picture on it. I'm really excited about that. Every single book event has been packed. So are people hungry to talk about this topic? Is this something on our minds? Is this something that we don't talk about for whatever fears we have? For the fear of upsetting someone, for the fear of not knowing what to say. It's better to say anything than not say something because you don't know what to say. If you come from a compassionate part of your heart, no matter what you say will be the right thing to say. And so people are hungry for this information. Every book event, packed. These are my incredible students. I have to tell you that your professor and the dean was just bragging about all of you nursing students, like in the way that I feel about my students. I look at these pictures and I just want to cry because they're so incredible. My students are first-generation college students, so they come to school, they work, they're translating English for their families, they're doing everything, and I'm so proud of them, and they're courageous enough to face their own mortality. So the journey begins with hope. I've now started something called the Center for Grief Services, so here's the website for that. We have our Be the Change website. We're moving into a nonprofit now. I'm going to be at the Nonprofit Summit in Rhinebeck, New York next week. And Steve Jobs said, and I love this, remember that you are going to die. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking that you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. And I took this picture at my cabin in New Hampshire, and it reminds me that in order to appreciate the light, it's always superseded by darkness first. And are you alive or just breathing? And that's the question. We have one precious life. We are the sole creators of our life. It's never too late to make the changes that need to be made. As long as we're breathing, we're creating our life. Thank you very much. What's that? Oh yes, Gab. Do you want to say a couple things about the class? I think we have time. 25 minutes.
Hello. My name is Gabrielle. I am one of Dr. Bowe's students, along with many other things. I'm in Be the Change, also one of her groupies. And I'm also a singer, so that's mostly why I'm here today. I took her class in the fall of 2013, and I was at a very, very critical point in my life. It was either I completely just give up or I figure out a new path. And I thank God or whoever every single day that I took her class, because it saved my life, and I wouldn't be here without that class. And I think that that's something that I say at all these things that I go to, because it's so true. So this song, called Read All About It by Emily Sandé, is a song that I've known for quite a while, but I never knew the meaning of the song because the words were just there, and as a singer, you know, you try to look for a deeper meaning. You try to look for that emotion and that feeling and that connection. And this song hit full circle for me when I took her class, and one of the first times she ever asked me to sing in class, this was the song I chose. So it's really important to me. It's just a little bit because I always mix to sing at these things, so I hope you enjoy it. You've got the words to change a nation, but you're biting your tongue. You've spent a lifetime stuck in silence, afraid you'll say something wrong. If no one ever hears it, how we gonna learn your song? So come on, come on, come on, come on. You've got a heart as loud as lion, so I let your voice be tamed. Baby, we're a little different, there's no need to be ashamed. You've got the light to fight the shadow, so stop hiding it away. Come on, come on. I wanna sing, I wanna shout, I wanna scream till the words dry out. So put it in all of the papers. I'm not afraid, they could read all about it, read all about it. Oh, 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 oh. Thank you.
Wow. That's yes, extraordinary. As Susan A. Paul, do you want to come join us as well? Said before, I'm Christina Stout, president of the Westchester End of Life Coalition. The mission of the Westchester End of Life Coalition is to help people in Westchester, the patients and the families, have a better end-of-life experience, and making sure that they have the medical, physical, emotional, and spiritual support that they need. And with me here is Maura Del Bene, who is, as you heard, the palliative care, probably the palliative care specialist in our county. If you need help with somebody who is in need of services, not hospice eligible yet, but ready to look at goals, as we heard, rather than to necessarily have a great deal of treatments. Maura is the person to contact, and she has extraordinary knowledge. We always say in the End of Life Coalition that this is not about death and dying. It is about life and living as well as you can until the end. And I think that we really heard that from Norma, that this really is about life and living and finding a direction, setting your goals, and figuring out why we're here and why life is so good. And maybe to make that happen, we need to atone, as we hear from some of your students in the book, or maybe we're building a legacy, or we do be the change work and help other people, whatever it is that make us feel alive. I did have some notes for this, but this was so exciting and so energizing that I think I'm going to change track a little bit. My first question, I think, is going to have to go to Norma to just ask her, because I know you're all curious about this. How can any one of us who is not at Kean University take this class? So would you just comment on that, and then I'll take it back to Susan and Maura.
Yes. How many of you would like to take a deaf class? I've been getting that question a lot, and I'm starting now to bring the deaf class in the form of a workshop to different venues. One of them is to Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, not that far from here, August 24th to the 29th. So we'll be doing a lot of the same writing exercises. We're going to be learning a lot of the same didactic information that I give in the class. And we're not going to see an autopsy, but we'll be doing some of the other. And I hear you all saying, oh, you know, some people don't want to go and do that, but it's so profound. It's incredible to see what happens when we abuse our body, what happens when we take care of our body. You know, just how fragile are we? You know, media makes us think that if you get shot, you're going to run and jump buildings and climb ladders. When you're shot, you're down, and you're highly likely to bleed out. You know, one small bullet hole could be the end. So we won't, in the workshop, do the autopsy, but I'll probably weave in pieces of those field trips into the experience of the workshop. So thank you for that.
Thank you. There are many ways to talk about death and dying and to teach. And I think Norma has a unique class, but so does a nursing program. The nurses and medical students all have to go out, and they, more likely than us, are going to be meeting several people who are close to death, dying, and dead. And I would like to hear from Susan how you help your nursing students explore that experience and learn how to deal with those encounters.
Well, one of the things that we do here at Concordia College, New York, we have a course. I think it's safe to say we're one of the few nursing programs that has a course like this, and it has a title that sometimes makes students roll their eyes, and it's called Cultural and Spiritual Dimensions of Nursing Care Delivery. Doesn't that sound like a deadly syllabus?
I love that.
Okay.
It makes me think we're going to meditate and we're going to learn about people's culture. Sounds great.
And this course has evolved over the 5 years of the program, and we have amazing instructors in this course. They're so incredible that some of our faculty who have offices near where this course is being taught want to go into the class. There are students here who have taken the course. I've never taken it. I'd kind of like to. And what that course does is require the students to take a look at themselves and to understand their comfort with themselves, to take a look into their own hearts and their own souls. Nursing is so complicated because we ask our students to engage in cognitive, there's a lot of information they have to know, and they have tests to take, and they have a grade they have to achieve, and that's hard. But we also ask them to engage in psychomotor skills. They have to use their fingers, and I was never too good at that, which is probably not something to admit considering I'm a nurse practitioner. But anyway, and then we ask them to work on the affective dimension of nursing and their lives and what that means. And so in the course Cultural and Spiritual Dimensions of Nursing Care Delivery, we ask the students to explore themselves. We have one professor who makes them stand on a paper towel. Did any of you have to stand on the paper towel? No, nobody. Okay, so somebody. Okay, there they are. They are the paper towel standers, and they have to look at themselves. How, do they want to stand in the box? Do they want to get out of the box and look at their lives? And then once they've taken a look at those values in their own lives and their own hearts, that we require them to take a look at the lives of other people from a cultural and spiritual perspective. And that's not about death. That's about life, and that's about taking care of people. And so I think that's a unique course, but I do think it helps folks come to recognize the need for themselves to live while they live. Teaching students about death is difficult because oftentimes folks are looking for a prescription, for a script. I want to know what the appropriate nursing intervention is in this situation. And as you have pointed out, the appropriate nursing intervention is a human intervention in that moment. So that is a bit of a struggle for us all, for nursing students, for nurses, for people living their lives. But that's one way we hope to approach life and death issues, maybe not death itself, because death is about life.
Absolutely. Okay, well, Maura deals on a daily basis. She meets with patients who have serious illness and who come to her to get guidance and direction. So maybe you could speak about how you address this issue when you're sitting with patients and their families, how this conversation actually has to happen in a clinical setting.
So the first thing I say to myself before I walk in a room is that this is their experience. Nothing has to happen for me. It's their experience. It has to happen for them at their pace. And hopefully their pace of understanding and opportunity that they might take from the experience of living with serious illness, knowing or maybe having a sense that they're on a trajectory toward dying, is that those two things will come together perfectly. But there's no control over that, just like there's no control over illness. There are things we can do to contain and to support, but at the same time, I think having the privilege of being in the nursing profession and blending that with a lot of medicalization is that you can't forget that this is something that we can just run alongside and guide. And having been privileged to work with people with neuromuscular disease, ALS, through MS, through cancer, through lung disease and kidney disease, no two people live and die in the same way. And so our job is to steward them in the best way possible. And sometimes we never ever use the word dying. Sometimes we never ever talk about the prognosis or the time frame that they have. The art of working with people with serious illness, I think, is to have all the intellectual property of knowing what's happening physiologically with them, but letting them bring to surface what's the emotional experience for them like, what's the true lived experience like. Sitting with a 45-year-old woman this morning who is on her trajectory of dying, in the hospital, she's got a recurrence of her breast cancer, and she has no idea what the scans really said. She doesn't understand why her arm is now the size of a 300-pound football player's arm, whereas 2 weeks ago it wasn't like that. And it's oozing, and it's painful. And her 4-year-old son is sitting at home waiting for her to return. So how do you manage that? What do you have to say? Nothing. You have to hear, and you have to really be perceptive as to what's important to her, and to work forward knowing that one day she will die. And all you can do is give her the best of herself and yourself and make sense of it for her in a way that's palatable. Because this is not about giving information, it's about experiencing something. And being able to do it with people is a privilege I have had for many, many years.
Do you talk to them about setting goals, what their wishes are? Does one get into those kind of conversations, or does that depend as everything
I think it evolves. I think it depends. I think I have patients and families who I remember forever because of the wondrous conversations we've had. And there will be patients and families I remember forever because of the poverty of conversation, but also at the same time the ability for them to come back and keep talking, even though we never got to talk about what we really needed to talk about, but it happened all the same. And the outcome was the same. Maybe the experience was positive all the same. So I think we all think that things happen by script. Do the goals get discussed? Does the journey, do we have I think the wonder of why I go to work every day smiling and coming home feeling very accomplished is that I can't control any of that. I can just participate in it and give it the best of what I've been taught through the years and what other families, academic, one of my instructors from nursing school happens to be in the audience. She doesn't know she's one of the reasons why I do what I do every day. Right? The dynamic of human behavior is phenomenal, and being a nurse and having that access has been privileging, and doing it with the dying is even better.
I have a very quick story, a similar kind of thing, actually, an intervention by another incredible nurse. I collected my dissertation data at Johns Hopkins at the National Breast Center, and I'm sitting with Lily Shockney, who is the director of the National Breast Center, who's a nurse, and the phone rings, and she picks up the phone, and we're working, so she puts it on speakerphone. And this man is on the other end, and he says to her, listen, I didn't know where else to call, but I've been able to look up all of my wife's medications and treatments until today. The doctor came in and very quickly said that he's starting her on something new, and I don't know what it is. And so she said, well, what is it? Just spell it for me. And he spells HOZPISE. Now I'm like, I can't breathe. I'm just like, oh my God, I'm glad I didn't answer the phone. What is she going to do? And she said, okay, listen, I need to tell you something. It's not a medication. Your doctor has prescribed now, your wife's in the end stage of her cancer, and he's putting her in a hospice program for end-of-life care. And the man almost panicked and said, why didn't he tell me that? Well, I think a lot of times, doctors don't like to deliver that kind of news, And he kind of said that and left. And he goes, I don't know what to do. I have young children at home. And Lily, who's won every nursing award, her office is just like awards everywhere, and I know now why. She said, get a pencil and a piece of paper. I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like getting a pencil and paper. I'm going to tell you what to do. Like, this is going to be great. And she said to him, I want you to go to the Hallmark store, your local Hallmark store, the nearest one to wherever you are right now. I'm going, where is she going with this? And she said, when you get there, you need to ask for the manager. And you need to ask the manager to take you to the back of the store. And now I'm like totally confused. She said, in the back of the store will be cards for every occasion that's not a holiday that's coming up. And I want you to buy a holiday card for every Easter, every Christmas, every graduation, and every birthday for each of your children from now until they turn 18. And every time your wife has a lucid moment, I want you to give her a card so that she can sign them for her children. And your children will continue to get cards from their mother even after she's gone. Took my breath away from another nurse who just, had that incredible wisdom.
Extraordinary insight and wisdom.
Yeah.
A lot of it is about being able to talk and being able to have conversations with those we love and with our doctors. Let me just ask you, this time I'm not going to ask you if you have your healthcare proxy. That's usually my question when I go. But I am going to ask you if you have had a conversation about what your wishes would be or what your plans would be for the time when, not if, when you are going to die. How many have had that conversation with a near person, an adult child, a spouse? Could you raise your hand if you've had those conversations? So, some people are doing pretty well on this. This is, because one of the things that is really important, we feel, is not just to have that healthcare proxy that designates somebody who will speak for you in case you can't speak for yourself, somebody who perhaps can look at the word hospice and know what it is and then speak for you to the doctor and say, okay, what does this mean? But also that you have had the conversation so that you know what that person wants. That person might not want the same thing you do. So are those conversations tough to start? I think they might be sometimes. So, we have a few little tips up in our hats at the End of Life Coalition. But I think I'd like to hear, what some thoughts from you, and then maybe we'll open it up to the audience to close the evening to see either your comments or if you have some thoughts on how we can get this conversation started among ourselves and in our families. Do you have a comment?
Well, I do. I think that many of us tried to have those conversations with our loved ones. And I know only because I've done it myself. When my grandmother was dying, she was trying to tell me things that she wanted. She tried to give me a piece of jewelry that belonged to her, and I wouldn't accept it. And I said, "Oh, Nana, you're going to be feeling better. I'm a nurse, and I'm saying this. You're going to be feeling better. I want you to wear that necklace." I think we shush people up. We have to deal with our own anxiety about these topics so that we can have these conversations. We have to do it. It's much better to know what someone wants. I just spoke at the Rutgers End of Life Conference about 4 weeks ago, and I met Julia Quinlan, Karen Ann Quinlan's mother, and I thanked her for being so courageous and for being the pioneer for a lot of what we know now as dying with dignity. And we have to be brave. We have to stop that voice in our head that wants to just shush it all up and not have the conversation.
Do you want to make a comment on the tip that you had?
Well, I have discussed this with my family, and just in case anybody's interested, my healthcare proxy is located in the bar, in my house. In my house. I don't get the ideas. I don't want anybody to miss it. I know that someone will need a drink. So that's my tip: is have a conversation, write it down, put it in a place where you know people are going.
That's amazing. That's fantastic.
And Maura, do you have some tips?
I don't have a bar in the house.
How to start the conversation?
Well, now though, that's great.
I'm wondering about all the young people that you've touched in your class, and I think it's extraordinary to open up the comfort level with our living and our dying and the potential for that and what still can be done knowing, right?
Yes.
When someone is ill, how much
Yes.
living can still be achieved, and how the focus is not always on the dying. And the importance of conversations and not having judgment for families and doctors and nurses and other professionals who say, "I can't do this. This is not my gift and talent." Or, "I've done the best I can do. I need someone else to pass the baton to." I think that's another teaching point, that not everybody is going to have a healthcare proxy and not everybody's going to be able to have a conversation. But for those who can, I think we're well on our way to making that easier. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of work to be done with just generally being comfortable knowing that there's an unknown, right? And even when there's illness, there's a tremendous amount of unknown. And one of the reasons why I don't make people talk about what we think is going to be their outcome or their time frame is that we don't want to contaminate the unknown of what their living is going to be and their experiences. And so I think sometimes talking about things is hard for some people.
And sorry.
But connecting the dots and asking permission to ask the question, "Have you talked about it?" just plants a seed that they will take with them later, and it will grow somewhere. It may just not grow in front of us in that moment. And so I think giving a lot of permission and opportunity to know that there are people who will have the conversation with them is also very valuable.
So my little tip is, don't wait until somebody is seriously ill when this conversation is important. You have the conversation right now. Go home and have that conversation. I had the conversation with my family at Thanksgiving. We put the little kids in bed, sat down with a glass of wine and said, "Now we're going to talk about what I want to do, when my time comes." And my husband said, "Well, I need to talk about mine too, because we don't have the same wishes." And the adult kids that we had, the reason we did this was because we have two new a daughter and a new son-in-law, and so we figured they need to know too, so that there's not too much strife in the family. We all sat down and we explained we wanted, and I realized that 2 of them still had not signed their healthcare proxy, so they got that done. And, you know, we were the only ones that talked, my husband and I, but I have a feeling that, you know, when they got back to the bedrooms, they were realizing that they needed to have the conversation too. And it's so much easier to have it when things are happy. And it's a conversation that comes back again. You don't finish it in one time. Circumstances change. There's another conversation. But if you've started it at a point when you're in a good place in your health journey, it is a lot easier. And I think we're out of time.
Do we want to just offer anyone a couple of questions before we conclude
Yes.
tonight? I would like to point something out. I think 2 things have come across loud and clear to me with your students. Is listening and the writing, the exercises in writing. We all talk about conversation, but writing is incredibly therapeutic. So you might not be able to have the conversation, but you can write it down.
That's right.
And what I want to know is, do you think students at the end of their experience in the classroom were better listeners and better writers?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And unfortunately, in the lives that we live, and especially for my students that live in extended families, and I mean, just a few weeks ago, in this last semester, one of my students was taking death in perspective, and her grandfather started the dying process, and she had all her notes, you know, on the biology of dying and what happens in the body as the organ systems shut down. And so she was able to tell her family, you know, and she pulled out her folder with her papers in it. And she had written her goodbye letter already to her grandfather because he was such an important person in her life. She read it out loud to him. The writing is incredible. The listening is incredible. They come in, they're all kind of macho and uncomfortable and not knowing, you know, what we get ourselves into, but we're going to see an autopsy, so we're going to stick it out, you know. And then by the end, everyone is so connected, and they read their writing out loud. It's one thing to write it down, and then to give it voice is just an incredible thing too. But yeah, they use it right away. Thank you for the
Well, I want to
question.
thank you all. It's been most inspiring.